Walk into a high-end department store today. Go to the shoe section. You will see rows of stilettos, pumps, and platforms. They are delicate, they are expensive, and they are marketed exclusively to women as the ultimate symbol of femininity and seduction. We are told that beauty is pain. We are told that teetering on a 3-inch spike is the price you pay for fashion. But what if I told you that for most of human history, if you saw someone wearing high heels, they weren't walking down a runway. They were likely holding a sword, riding a warhorse, or hacking apart a dead animal. Welcome to the Mundane Files. Today, we are stripping away the glamour to reveal the gritty, masculine, and bloody origin of the high heel. This is the 10-minute saga of how a piece of military technology designed for killers became a tool of torture for women. To find the true origin of the heel, we have to ignore the fashion magazines and travel back thousands of years to ancient Egypt, specifically to the slaughterhouses. Life in ancient Egypt was brutal, and the job of a butcher was one of the filthiest professions on earth. Imagine a room filled with the carcasses of cows and sheep. As the butchers worked, stripping the meat and removing the organs, the floor would become a lake of blood, entrails, and waste. It was slippery, it was disgusting, and for the butchers, walking through this sludge barefoot or in flat sandals was impossible. They needed elevation. So they strapped wooden blocks to their feet. These weren't shoes for style. They were tools for sanitation. The raised heel allowed them to step over the gore without dirtying their feet. It gave them traction on a floor slick with death. This is the humble, grotesque beginning of the high heel. It wasn't about looking tall, it was about staying clean in a room full of blood. But as civilization advanced, the heel's function changed. It moved from the slaughterhouse to the theater. In ancient Greece, actors in plays wore platform shoes called kothorni. But here is the catch. The height of the heel depended on your importance. The main character wore huge, thick platforms to tower over everyone else. The servants and lower-class characters wore flats. This was the first time humanity decided that height equals power. And this psychological trick, making yourself physically bigger than your peers, would eventually catch the attention of the deadliest warriors in the Middle East. We're leaving the butchers behind. We're moving to the battlefield because the high heel was about to become a weapon of war. Travel forward to the 10th century, to the Persian Empire, which is modern-day Iran. The Persian military was terrifying. They didn't just march on the ground, they dominated from the back of a horse. The Persian cavalry was famous for its archers, men who could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop. But there was a physics problem. Imagine riding a horse at 30 miles per hour. You need to stand up in your stirrups, the footholders on the saddle, to draw your bow and aim. But the motion of the horse is violent. If your foot slips forward through the stirrup, you lose your balance, you miss your shot, or worse, you fall and get trampled. Persian military engineers needed a way to lock the soldier's foot to the horse. Their solution was the high heel. They designed a riding boot with a reinforced 1-inch block heel. This wasn't for fashion, it was a locking mechanism. When the soldier stood up, the heel hooked onto the stirrup, securing him in place. It turned the rider into a stable tripod. He could stand up, turn his body, draw his bow, and fire with the precision of a sniper, all while the horse was moving beneath him. For hundreds of years, the high heel was the equivalent of a modern tactical boot. If you saw a man wearing heels in Persia, you didn't think he was feminine. You thought he was a killer. You knew he was a member of the elite cavalry. The sound of clicking heels didn't mean a model was coming. It meant an army was approaching. So how did this military boot end up in Europe? The year is 1599. The Shah of Persia, Abbas I, was looking for allies to help him fight the Ottoman Empire. He sent a massive diplomatic mission to the courts of Europe, to Russia, Germany, and Spain. When the Persian diplomats arrived, they caused a sensation. The European aristocrats had never seen men like this. They were rugged, exotic, and powerful, and they were all wearing high-heeled boots. At this time in Europe, men wore flat shoes or stockings. They looked at the Persians and saw virility. They saw masculinity. Almost overnight, the high heel became the biggest trend for men in Europe. Aristocrats started commissioning shoemakers to add heels to their boots, not because they rode horses, but because they wanted to look like the tough Persian warriors. It was the 17th century equivalent of buying a pair of Jordans because you want to be like a basketball player. But as the trend spread, it reached the most vain, insecure, and powerful man in the world. A man who would turn the heel from a tool of war into the symbol of pure ego.
Enter King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Louis was the absolute monarch. He built the Palace of Versailles. He believed he was chosen by God. But Louis had a secret shame. He was short. Historical records suggest he stood only 5 feet 4 inches tall. In a world where physical stature was linked to dominance, this drove him crazy. He hated looking up at his courtiers. So Louis weaponized fashion. He began wearing shoes with massive 4-inch heels, often decorated with battle scenes. With his heels and his massive wigs, he could project the image of a 6-foot-tall giant. But Louis wanted to ensure that everyone knew his heels were special. He didn't want the peasants wearing the same shoes as the king. In the 1670s, Louis passed a law that changed fashion history. He declared that only the king and the members of his inner circle were allowed to wear heels colored red. Why red? 2 reasons. First, red dye was incredibly expensive. It came from crushed insects imported from Mexico. Painting the soles of your shoes red was a way of saying, "I am so rich I can walk on money." Second, it was a subtle nod to the shoe's violent history. The red heel symbolized that the wearer's ancestors were warriors who had waded through blood. It also implied that the king did not dirty his feet. He floated above the filth of the streets. For decades, the red heel was the ultimate status symbol for men. If you look at portraits from the 1600s, Charles II of England, Louis XIV of France, they are all posing with their legs turned out, showing off their calves and their high heels. It was aggressive, it was masculine. So the big question is, when did it flip? How did we go from the king's shoe to the Cinderella shoe? The change started slowly in the mid-1600s. Women began to adopt men's fashion. They started cutting their hair shorter, wearing hats with broad brims, and smoking pipes. And they started wearing heels. At first, women wore heels to appropriate male power. They wanted to show they could be as tall and dominant as the men. But men are fragile creatures. As soon as women started wearing heels, men began to lose interest. They didn't want to dress like women. This led to a massive cultural shift in the 1700s, known by historians as the Great Male Renunciation. This was the moment when men decided that fashion was frivolous. The Enlightenment was happening. Science and logic were the new gods. Men decided to be rational. They had to dress simply. They abandoned makeup. They abandoned wigs. And finally, around 1740, men abandoned the high heel. They literally walked away from it, leaving the heel behind for women. And once men left it, the design of the shoe began to mutate into something much more dangerous.
Once the heel became exclusively female, its purpose changed from stability to instability. The Persian riding boot was a block heel. It was wide, it was solid, you could run in it. But women's heels in the 19th and 20th centuries became thinner and thinner. In the 1950s, a French designer named Roger Vivier invented the stiletto. This heel was named after a thin Italian dagger. It used a core of steel to support a heel so thin it looked like a needle. Think about the irony here. The Persian heel was invented to lock a soldier in place so he wouldn't fall. The stiletto was invented to make a woman unbalanced so she might fall. Why? Because when a woman wears high heels, her center of gravity shifts, her back arches, her chest pushes forward, her pelvis tilts. It emphasizes her sexual characteristics. It creates a wiggle when she walks because her body is fighting to stay upright. The shoe went from a tool of military function to a tool of sexual display. However, men didn't completely stop wearing heels. There is one group of men who refused to give them up. Look at the American cowboy. The cowboy boot, with its slanted Cuban heel, is the direct descendant of the Persian riding boot. Cowboys, like the Persians, needed to lock their feet into stirrups. So while men in the cities abandoned heels, the rough, tough men of the Wild West kept them. Even today, rock stars and movie heroes wear boots with heels to look taller and tougher. The DNA of the Persian warrior is still there, hiding under blue jeans. But for the most part, society has forgotten this blood-soaked history. We look at a woman in pain at a party, taking off her heels because her feet are bleeding, and we think this is just the price of beauty. We forget that the design she is wearing was born in a slaughterhouse to step over carcasses. We forget it was perfected by archers to kill enemies. History has a way of flipping scripts. The pink was once a boy's color. The dress was once worn by toddlers of both genders, and the high heel was once the mark of a king and a killer. So the next time you hear the sharp click-clack of a heel on the pavement, don't just think of a runway model. Think of the butcher, think of the cavalry, think of the Sun King, and ask yourself, who is really wearing the pants? This has been the Mundane Files. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of fashion, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments what everyday object should we investigate next. The file is closed.